Hello there, and welcome to the Planner Pals podcast, a podcast hosted by two true Planner Pals. My name is Mark, and I go by Mark Your Pages.
And I'm Jess or Jessica N, and I'm really excited for this episode because I swear projects are like my bread and butter. They are pretty much what most of my journal is filled with, and I know that you're really into projects too, Mark, so I want to get like all of your tips and apply them to my system.
Yeah, I'm really excited. This is like one of the first episodes where I get to really utilize a lot of the stuff that I do at work around project planning. It's why I keep a bullet journal, honestly. Also for all the tasks and the notes and things that I do. But planning in an analog way, for me personally, is a really great way to jumpstart a project, even though it eventually moves into a digital space, depending how you work. We have so many ideas and tips and things that we can do today. So I'm really excited to touch in this topic and get started because I know for you, you've got a really big event coming up for yourself that you're planning for.
Yeah, and I did the foolish thing of checking the calendar the other day, and it's like literally less than 4 months away. I am getting married. Which is, it's kind of funny because we've been engaged for such a long time, we've been together for such a long time that I'm like, I won't feel like, that different or anything. But the actual event itself, I'm like, oh my God, there are so many things that go into this, and I just need to get all of my ducks in a row. And right now, my ducks, like, one's on the hill, one's in the swamp, one's down the street. I'm just like, ah!
It's really exciting. I'm so excited for you. And I cannot wait to see the pictures and just to see it. I mean, obviously, y'all have been together, like you said, for a really long time. But like, this is a big moment. Like, a giant event to plan for, keeping everything together. I know you and I talked a little bit about it, I think in the previous episodes, where we talked about planning things digitally versus analog. And you were kind of in the slump of like, well, if I'm doing everything digitally right now and I'm not really using my journal, like, what's the right way to do this? And I think today's episode will be good because for me personally, and I know for you, we are very similar in this way. A lot of my planning for projects actually starts on paper. I just prefer to do it that way because it's in my own personal space and I can be messy with it and I can kind of jot stuff down wherever I want, which then helps me organize it and then feel really good and confident about putting it in a digital space. And especially for me, when I'm doing this for a larger team of people in project management and program management as well, it's really important that it makes sense for them. So I really like getting all of the ideas like out on paper. It's essentially like a project planning brain dump to a certain extent, and then feeling really good and confident about getting it out there for everyone else to see. So I'm excited to get started today.
Yeah, I completely feel you on that idea of starting on paper as well, because like there are just so many benefits to doing it there first. If we think about it in terms of like spaces we could use in a digital sense of like, what you could use to plan a project, a lot of them have a particular like setup or style or uniformity between each of the projects. It's like, okay, cool, here's your template. You must now apply it to every single project. And not every project is going to work with that specific template. When I think about project planning, I like to think about it as a very kind of like modular thing. It's like a pick and choose model of like, okay, well, this type of project needs an event list of like, like the location and the guest list and all of those kind of things. Whereas other projects aren't really event based. So it's like, I don't need a guest list for renovating my bathroom.
I mean, we need Vogel there. We need the contractor there. Maybe your mom and dad, just to get some of those inputs on design. No.
Yeah, the people from down the street because their bathroom probably looks better than mine and I like need their input. And yes, if you could all RSVP so that I know you're going to be there at 11 a.m. sharp.
Yeah, I think the idea of being able to scale projects appropriately is really important. That's a skill that you learn. A lot of what I've done, my background is in design and it hasn't always been in project or program management, but I've learned over time how to kind of manage that. And I think this is just something I like to throw out there because regardless of the type of role that you're in or what your job is, if it's not project management, you still need to know a little bit about that just to be able to kind of think through what is being done. There's a lot of like second thought methodologies that are out there to help you think beyond the initial piece. I know I've done a video on that previously, but even for myself, just talking through things sometimes helps you think like, okay, I have this much time to plan this. Let's go ahead and break that down. What are the different phases or the things that I need to do for these different parts? And so let's just kind of get into it, Jess, and talk about, this idea of like, how do we break down a really big project? And again, everyone can take this at different levels, a medium or a small project, and kind of break it down into smaller pieces. Like, what's your first like step when you're thinking through, or like, what do you need to kind of get a big project started?
Yeah, the first thing I usually like to start with is just, like you kind of said, is a brain dump. Getting anything and everything out of my head and onto typically paper or just somewhere so that I can start to make sense of it. Oftentimes, going into a project, I have a lot of ideas about it because when I get started, it's probably not like the first instance of having thought about the project. Usually, I've been sitting there ruminating on it for several months, if not years, being like, oh, I should do that. Or like come across a cute picture on Pinterest, like, oh, I should do that kind of a thing. You start to build up this idea in your mind of kind of where you want to go, but not necessarily like a set direction to head in. So by getting everything out of your head onto paper, it means you can kind of sort through the stuff that's gonna stay as part of the plan and the ones that are like side quests, distractions, other things that aren't really necessarily taking you where you want to go.
Another great tip too, especially when you're getting started, if you're the type of person that doesn't want to get kind of caught up with the space of a notebook. I'm also a big like post-it note fan, and using those and just sticking them up on a wall, or I mean, I've even laid that on like a poster board before, because sometimes you need to move those things around. You know, you're brain dumping, you're thinking about it, but you're not quite sure where it needs to go just yet. Or sometimes even like grouping or theming those liked ideas to kind of pull them together. It works really well in a more tactile, functional place if you don't want to waste a lot of paper. And post-it notes, of course, you can do that digitally. Brainstorming digitally is great. Like Miro is a great place, or FigJam, or so many different tools that are out there that you can use just to kind of get those out. But I completely agree with you. Kind of grabbing those little pieces of what you know is really helpful, because then it also helps you uncover like, what do I need to know, and making a note of that so you can go out and start to get that information to start to build that bigger picture.
Yeah, I love the point about being able to do it digitally as well, because like I do love sticky notes, but I get very particular about sticky notes and making sure like they're all aligned in a perfect grid shape. All of this, and it's like that's not the point right now. It doesn't need to be like beautifully organized. It just needs to be there. Whereas doing it digitally, you can use like snap functions and stuff so that things are all nicely aligned. It's like, okay, all of your sticky notes, because they're digital, are going to be perfectly aligned right way up, rather than, oh, that one's a little skew whiff and now I'm distracted from my project planning because I need to go put this in this perfect grid.
We've all been there. Yeah, I definitely love that auto snapping and cleanup features now. And like adding AI to a lot of the brainstorming stuff is fantastic, especially in those tools, because you can brain dump and throw it all out there, and then you don't have to use any extra brain power. You're like, can you just sort these for me by themes? Can you give me a summary of what's up? It can make things a lot easier so that you can really focus in on getting into your project. One of the big things for me, especially at work, I've done this, just kind of a multi-step process that we take as a team. But something that we've been doing as well recently is just first taking a look at like, what is the timeline that we have to get this done. I find that that really helps dictate how much effort and what we need to know, and like how quickly do we need to get to it. So if it's like, hey, you have 3 months for this, it's easy to start to break that down a little bit and be like, okay, we have 3 months to do this, so let's go ahead and start to set up and think about how we might break this down. It gets a little bit more difficult where it's like, hey, there's this big project and you need to have it all together in 3 weeks instead, and suddenly you're just like, whoa. But having that due date, that end date, is always a really important thing for me. I try to tell my team, like, even if it's forecasted, even if we're not exactly 100% sure, give me a good idea. And like at work, they're like, oh, by the end of Q3. I'm like, okay, well, that's 3 months, like, let's give me a little bit of a closer idea, even if it's not perfect. But that just helps me, I guess, like first and foremost, like knowing the time that I have to get this done. And then I can start to think about how I break that down.
Yeah, and I think that by knowing when your deadline is, or even like a soft deadline is, it means that when you're doing this initial brain dumping process of getting all of your ideas out, you can start to think about what's going to be realistic for the time you have. So, for instance, when we were thinking about planning a wedding or whatnot, because we effectively decided in January this year, it's like, oh yeah, we're going to get married this year. Like, why not? 25 is a cool number, so let's do it in 2025. My personal preference for date would have been April 25th, because it's literally the perfect date. But planning a wedding in under 4 months is probably like, it starts to put in some restrictions. And restrictions can be great for creativity. Creative thinking thrives when you give it some boundaries. But I was like, yeah, no, this isn't going to align with my vision. So given what I wanted, it's like, well, now I know that deadline needs to be pushed out. I can't have the perfect date. I'm going to have the ass end of August instead.
Take what you can get. What's the weather like at the ass end of August for you?
Not great, but that also means that things are cheaper and you're more likely not to clash with anybody else's wedding plans. Yeah,
Perfect.
winter finishes up in August, so like spring technically starts at the start of September. So I'm like 1 day, 2 days shy of spring. I don't think it counts though, because spring, at least at the start of spring, is still soggy and very hit and miss. So I'm like, it'll be fine. We opted for somewhere that's an indoor venue though, because we knew the weather was going to be likely a little bit crappy.
Yeah, my wife and I got married in October, and it was 90 degrees the day that we got married. Like in October for us is like fall, like you're in the middle of fall. And we were like, why in the world? I mean, it's a beautiful day. Don't get me wrong. It was perfect, but it was definitely like, okay, because that's kind of important. And especially with your events, depending what you're planning, knowing when is important. Because like you just said, even now, like we have to think about what's happening at that time of the year. Whether it's a work project, you're like, oh, end of Q3 or, whenever that is for you. And you're like, okay, well, what happened last year at that time? Are we wrapping things up? Like for work, we also have to work around like code freezes at the end of the year because I work in like digital product. And so it's just like, okay, well, once like November 15th comes around, nothing else can really be pushed out there. So a lot of the times when someone says to us, like, it has to be due by a certain time, you also have to think about like what's happening at that time. Are there any other limitations? So I'm a big fan of a big calendar. I'll tell you that. That's always a big fan of mine. Like I just want to see everything like lined up in weeks. That's how my brain works the best, I feel like.
Yeah, no, I would completely agree with that. I love things that have been organized in terms of like just week upon week upon week rather than like a year at a glance where oftentimes you can't really write anything on it because they're just like individual numbers or whatnot. Given the way that I think about the passage of time, and it's like, I don't know, did other people do this? When I visualize a week, I visualize it as a circle, and you've got the 5 days of the week down the bottom and then the 2 weekend days at the top, and then you're kind of just going around that circle over and over again. When I try and visualize it in terms of like a project plan though, it's very much like a week stack. So there are no months, there are only weeks, and it's just stack upon stack upon stack upon stack.
Yeah, I vision weeks horizontally. So I think about a Sunday to a Saturday. And most of the time with work stuff, you can like click a button to take out the weekend. So it's only work days for us. But I just see it as like a stack of weeks. Like honestly, as like a calendar, like 4 to 5 weeks in a block. I'm like, okay, show me this. And then the next month, think of that thing. And that's how I look at it. Interesting. A circle. I've never thought about a week that way before.
Yeah, so I'm either like spiraling up or I'm spiraling down. Hopefully spiraling up. But I like your point about knowing, like, thinking about that deadline, right? And not just using it as like hey, what's realistic for that amount of time, like, 3 months out, 4 months out, or whatnot. But it's like, what else is happening in that span of time that is going to dictate how much could be done or like how we're going to approach this? Because it's like, just because the deadline is the end of August, it doesn't mean that I have every single moment of every single day from now until the end of August to work on that thing. Like, I have work, like recording this podcast. It's fun, but it's still work. I have other commitments. I'm like, going to go wild with you, which I'm so excited about, but it's like that is going to be a project unto itself that is going to take time, effort, attention, resources away from planning a wedding.
Yeah, we've talked about that even for ourselves. We're like, should we record a podcast today or should we plan for Go Wild? We're like, maybe Go Wild, because if we can lock that down, then we'll be in a good spot for like everything else. I mean, even for something like that and thinking through that project plan, even though, I mean, we're professionals, Jess, so like we know what we're doing. We've done stuff like this before, but the idea still is there of saying, okay, we have this many weeks until it's done. And we have to, meet with the presenting team on this day. So we have to be able to communicate what we're working on by that time. Giving ourselves that kind of timeline is really good. One thing real quick, because I feel like we're kind of already like really scooting down the timeline here of our timeline of this. I would also say, like, as you're going through that brainstorm, and honestly, I feel like what we're saying here is that you need to have kind of an idea of all of these pieces on that kind of brainstorm space, whatever that is, to be able to then break that down. We already kind of hinted on a little bit with that half joke about like the RSVP and about who's going to come. But having the people that need to be a part of this project, though, is a really important part of that too. So when you're brainstorming, you're throwing things out there, along with the date, along with the project, kind of the ideas of what you might have, also make sure you think about all of the different participants that are a part of that. So if it is a work project that you're working through, right, that's going to be any of the teammates, who's the team lead, who else needs to be a part of that conversation? Maybe it is a project manager or a product owner or the developers, right? I'm speaking very much in terms of myself, but if you're working in more of a different space, and it's hard for me to think outside of design because I've lived it my entire life. So I'm like, is there a printer? Are we doing press checks? Like all these different things. Maybe you can give me a better idea, because people that don't work in design are probably like, what the hell is he talking about?
Well, I mean, if you think about it in terms of any kind of project where it's more than just you yourself as an individual, like if we think about it in terms of a home renovation project or whatnot, if you're doing everything by yourself, good for you. Heck to the nah would that be me, but good for you. So, there might be, I don't know, painters that you need to get in contact with, a plumber, an electrician, like a general builder or whatever. You need to know when these people need to do their part so that then they come into the project at the right time. Not a lot of point hiring the painter before the electricians come and bust up your walls to recable things. Like, cool, it looks really beautiful. Let me punch a hole through that. So making sure you know when people are needed, who is needed, and like the kind of ordering of that, so that then your project can run as smoothly as possible. Otherwise, you get instances where, for instance, when we moved into this house, one of the things that we wanted to do before we moved was get an electrician in to cable all of our like Ethernet and stuff throughout the house, so that we couldn't, rather didn't just have to rely on Wi-Fi. The Rona happened, and that didn't happen at the time we wanted it to, which meant that all of our stuff got moved in, and it's like, cool, now all of our stuff is here, so the electrician has to like either move around our stuff or like move our stuff out of the way to do their job. So it just got a little bit messy. Obviously, there's not a lot of planning that can come into it that's going to save you from a pandemic, but still.
It's a lot to think through that. But stacking, I think, is a really good way to then kind of move into the next part, which is like, once you have all of those ideas out, your deadline, the timeline that you're working with, those participants. You did a great job, Jess, of like thinking of another idea outside of product design. You're like, what about a home renovation project? I'm like, that is so smart. Perfect. What I like to do often, whether you're thinking in circles or squares, whatever shape you like of those weeks, that's when I start to like to break things down a little bit. I like to do it in weeks. Again, scale this project appropriately based off of the timeline that you have. If it's a smaller project that's only going to take you a week, or you only have a week's worth of time to do, you might scale that down into days or even into hours. How many hours am I going to need to accomplish this project to get it done by the end of the week? You can also think about this for your own personal tasks if you need to. But that's a really big part of like my next step, is like I take all those ideas and I start to break them down into those pieces, really. And who are they? I often in my bullet journal will create a little bit of like a project starter sheet, which is pretty straightforward. It just has all the main information on it, which is like, what's the project name? When is it due? And then I often will put in like the start date. And then I put those important people. And then I'll usually focus on like milestones, like taking from that idea that we talked about, like that analog or Post-it note or whatever you're using, and say, okay, what are the big kind of things that are going to happen with this? It's always starts with like the project start or the project kickoff, having all the right people in the room to have that conversation, and then ends with the launch, right? Or the completion of that project. And then from there, depending on the timeline, I start to break down and think down a little bit more of like, okay, let's go ahead and focus on like phases, for instance, is the way I like to think about projects a lot. It's like, okay, we're working on the first phase, which is going to include ideation and discovery and research. Phase 2 is then like wireframing and like content design, and then moving from there into like finalizing it until launch. Home projects could be a very similar way. Like you mentioned, we want to demo the space first before we do anything else. Then we need to think about what's happening after that. Now that the walls are open, electrician, plumber, like whatever else that is, starting to really think about how that project is going to break down is really important before you pick up the phone and start calling people to come in.
Yeah, and I think that also by having those milestones, or what I like to call like metrics of success, it's essentially little things that you're going to hit along the way as you get towards this kind of like final outcome of the project. It gives you a way to monitor your progress. So it very much visibly shows you that you are headed in the direction you want to head in. I'm thinking about it in terms of like the wedding. So it's like, did I write the guest list? That was a milestone moment, like having that finalized. Another milestone moment is like being able to send out the save the dates. Another milestone moment is having like XYZ vendors booked. So each of those are kind of like a little check that I can put into my journal to say like, yep, I've done that task, I've done that thing, or like I'm up to this part in the process. So I am making progress, especially when you end up with a project list of like stuff that you need to do that's like 50 yards long. You're like, oh my gosh, can't see the forest through the trees. Like there's just so many things to do. Having those kind of like specific milestones set aside as like I know I'm making progress if I have gotten like XYZ checked off at least, or if I've gotten to stage A, B, C.
Yeah, and the milestones are great too, because those to me are like your headers over top of like your content, right? Like the big milestone is like, what's that big thing we're working towards? It's similar like in bullet journaling with nesting things, right? You have that big thing that you need to accomplish, but there's always those subtasks that need to happen that kind of fall below that bigger picture. And I love that too, because I love having that high level view, because it makes me feel less overwhelmed by all the things that have to get done. And I hate saying this, but it makes so much sense. It's like such a corporate thing, but double click into that topic, right? You go into it to open it up a bit more, and you're just like, and here's all the things that I have to do. It's nice to be able to like close that off a little bit, just to be like, okay, these are the big things that I need to work towards getting done. And that feels obtainable before you start like going down that next level, right? And being like, okay, save the dates. I have to send those out. Then it's like, okay, am I making them myself? And if so, what does that task list look like? Or if I'm ordering them someplace, like what does that need to look like? It helps break it down a little bit more, but I also like it because it does help me also feel like I make decisions at that point. And again, I'm making decisions before I like hit go, just to make that clear. I'm not running, by the seat of my pants as the project's already flying along. But having those milestones helps me make decisions at that point to say, like, what do I want to happen in this time frame? And then make a decision and kind of choose there. And then like, okay, then I can go down that path before I move on to that next phase or big thing that I have to do.
Yeah, and I think that those milestones can also help you give yourself kind of like scaffolded deadlines to keep you accountable to working on the project, because it's all good and well at the start of a project to be like, oh yeah, I want to have this done by the end of September or like whatever. But if you haven't kind of taken the time to map out when parts of that project are going to get worked on, you might get to the start of September and be like, oh yeah, I said I was going to do that thing and I haven't actually started any of it. And some of these tasks actually take like 3 weeks, and that's going to take the majority of the month, and then I won't have time for the other stuff. So by giving yourself those kind of like little milestone moments, those metrics of success, you can build those into your plan so that you have smaller deadlines to hit along the way to make sure that you're still making progress and that your initial deadline that you set for yourself is still realistic.
It's a beautiful point, Jess. Totally forgot about those secondary deadlines that keep us on track. It's like, yes, those can move, but let's not try to move them too much, because impacting things at any point in that process, depending on how tight of a deadline you're working on, can kind of impact that next phase. It's kind of the similar thing with the house project. It's like, well, and that always gets hard too when you have like that third party part, like you said, like you have contractors need to come in. When the guy's like, you know what, I can't come out this week to be able to take care of your electrical. You're like, cool, but like the guy who's patching up my walls is coming next week, so like I kind of need you here. And then suddenly everything starts to move back a little bit. That's why I like, honestly, keeping projects kind of small, and to be very honest, where I am the only one accountable. It rarely ever happens that way, but I love being solely accountable, or maybe like one other person I trust, because when we start to add like a lot of people, it turns into like that school project where you have like 2 people doing all the work and the one person sitting there like eating the bag of chips and drinking a soda. Like, we good? Can I leave now?
Completely understand. The only issue I have is that, like, when I am the only one responsible, it means that I'm also the only one who will hold myself accountable, which means I can slack off. But if somebody else is partially responsible, then I can get all up on their case, being like, well, actually, sir, you said that you were going to be here at XYZ at a time and XYZ at a place, and you're not here. So
Yeah, you make a good point. And actually, to piggyback off of that real quick, Jess, one of the things that I really appreciate and do to hold yourself accountable, whether it's with yourself, I love an accountability partner for a project too, but also picking a cadence for you to do the check-ins for yourself, whether it's just, you're taking a look at your timelines or what that looks like. I love a weekly check-in just because that's what I do with my teams already anyway, because that feels like the right amount of time. It is important to kind of gauge what that looks like though, right? Because I think you can do it too much where everyone's like, I'm sick. Nothing's changing. I'm sick. sick of talking about this. Like, please no. But then if you go too far, then suddenly like you miss those opportunities to connect. So I think that's an important thing to think about too, like how often you want to do that. I have a friend of mine who does a little bit different. It's honestly for project management, but kind of for like house projects. Her and her husband, they have a Kanban board on a wall in their office, and they have weekly stand-ups for home projects, which I think is the coolest thing ever. It makes me so happy whenever I talk to her about it. And it's just a way for them to touch base on like what's going on, hold each other accountable, but also talk about any progress that's been made, or, hey, we really need to pick up on this because we said we would do that. So like, let's go ahead and move that over to the like to do bin, or like the working on it. We'll get that done this week. It's just like a really fun little tidbit. I just like that so much.
Yeah, no, we do a similar thing. We would like, ideally it would be weekly. We don't do it weekly. Typically it's like every 3-ish weeks kind of a thing on average, if we're taking the average of it. But it is just a really good opportunity to be like, hey, these are the goals that we set for our household or for ourselves together, or like things that we wanted to hold each other accountable to or whatnot. How's it going? Because otherwise life just be lifing. Things just happen. And then those kind of like intentions, I don't like the word intentions. I've actually decided that I don't like it at all, because an intention is just like a dream without a plan.
A wish.
Exactly. It's a wish. Like it doesn't feel like it actually is going to do anything. It's like, oh, well, I intended to get up on time and go work out. It's literally, it feels just like an excuse almost. But that's another can of worms. Anyways, but you set these kind of goals for yourself or for your household or whatnot, and you wanted to have somebody else hold you accountable to it. When are they going to do that? Because most of the time, if they try to hold me accountable to it in the moment, I tell them to politely rack off and don't tell me what to do, and you're not my manager. So having that set period, though, which is intentionally there for us to have those conversations, it feels more productive and just kind of like safer, quote, quote, because I know it's coming, which means I'm not likely to like lash out and say like, no, you can't tell me what to do. I want to eat 3 kilos of chocolate and you're not the boss of me.
I just like envision Vogel being like, Jess, we have to do this. You're like, you're not my husband. He's like, but wait, aren't we working towards that? And even so, like, what are you talking about? I'm not your boss. Like, we're partners. You're just like, sorry, I don't like to be told what to do.
It's literally that. It's like, I am the kind of person who, if I was just like just about to turn around and unpack the dishwasher and somebody says, hey, can you unpack the dishwasher? I'll be like, nope, not doing it now. Nope, who's gonna? Not gonna do it no more, no. Yeah, rebel brain kicks in, and she's really, really helpful. Said nobody ever.
But then you have to kind of curb that when you're at work or you're doing a project and you're like, actually, it is your job to tell me what to do. It's like, there's a really funny meme I see sometimes where it's like, I don't want you to tell me what to do, but at the same time, I need a detailed list of all the things I need to do to accomplish the things you'd like me to do. It's just like this like terrible battle where it's like, I need all that information, but don't tell me what to do. So I feel you on that rebel brain 100%.
Yeah, you just need to like take the to-do list and call it side quests. So then everything's optional. It's like, oh, look at this pick and choose. I have so many options now. And then try to aim towards getting them all done.
Yeah, and then it becomes too much. It's like when you play video games, you're like, I've taken on too many side quests. What about that main objective that we're trying to work towards?
Yeah, 100%. And then you've got this like laundry list of things that you need to do. And it's like, someone needs you to find their chicken. I'm like, just get a new chicken. Why am I, hero of the realm being called in for this? Yes, this is a specific example. I'm playing Assassin's Creed Odyssey and like, I can't find the main quest anymore because there's just so many side quests.
Oh, I feel that 100%. I'm playing an old game right now. We're getting off topic here, but it's still project management nonetheless. But it's called Tiny Tina's Wonderlands. It's like a Borderlands offshoot. And I really enjoy the game. However, anytime you click on like a new like subtask to take on or like a sub project, it replaces your main objective with the newest one that you picked. And so I could be like on a quest and a little like sign pops up like, do you want to add a new one? I'm like, yeah, like while I'm here. And then suddenly I don't know where I am. And I'm like, son of a bitch, where was I going? I can't remember. End of side quest.
Well, this is the thing, right? Like, technically speaking, these are projects. A project, in its most basic sense, is anything that you need to do that has 2 or more actions required, right? Like, it's not just like a one and done type thing. So a project could be, like, I guess we could go with this, like making the bed. If you wanted to break it down into all of the tiny little tasks that you have to do to make the bed, yes, it is a project. It is probably not a project that needs extensive amount of planning, but that's also probably because you've done it enough that you don't need to write all those things down. Big theories. Some of us don't make our bed. I do make my bed. That is one of my, shining moments. Is like I can't remember to brush my teeth consistently, but I make my bed.
Well, I think another thing is really important just while we're on this topic of side quest and that is building in buffer into your timelines as well. I think it's really important to give yourself a little bit of that I'm going to slack off kind of mentality because it happens. It's just important to get back on track right away. But I love to add buffer, especially to projects, because I think it's like you kind of have to plan for what you don't know is going to happen, right? It's the idea, not so much about like the weather, right? If you're going to have an outdoor event, right? But it's still important to think about like, well, what does happen if something bad goes on, or like we don't get the delivery of X thing by this timeline? Giving yourself a little bit of space, I think, is really important. Again, if you are the type of person that goes on these special side quests away from your main objective, it's important to give yourself time to like realize that and come back to that. So I think if you have the time to do it, I always like to extend it by like a day or two, regardless of kind of where that is. I think about deadlines often. Like I said, I think about deadlines and working in weeks. So if I say to somebody that it's going to take 1 week to accomplish, I usually would be like, okay, for the most part, that's going to take a week to do, but let's give ourselves like an extra 2-day buffer. And in some cases, if you're like working a Monday through Friday type of job, you actually get 2 bonus days on top of that for the weekend. Not that everyone likes doing work on the weekends, but let me tell you, when you're grinding down to that deadline and you're not there yet, having those extra buffer days are really important.
Yeah, and if it's the kind of thing where like you are working on a project where you can't set your deadline, you can set your own deadline that's a little before it. So it's like, like tricking yourself into getting things done, or like, putting that time pressure on, because sometimes having a time pressure can get you in that like, okay, we got to hustle mindset. What is it? Pressure makes diamonds and all of that kind of thing. It's not the healthiest thing to approach every area of life, but still, it can be useful. I also find that like when we add this buffer in and such, because we are so very much like inclined to make plans based on perfect, it can be helpful pretty much anywhere to add that buffer in. It doesn't need to be because something like catastrophic happened or whatnot. It's like, oh yeah, I got like hella unwell and I couldn't work for 50% of the days that I had originally given myself or anything like that. It's just like the natural tendency of things to take a little bit longer than we predict them to take, because we're predicting under like ideal, perfect working conditions. Like, oh yeah, I'll sit down at my desk at 10 a.m. and I will work solidly for an hour with 0 distractions, and I won't get any notifications from Instagram and then start scrolling for 20 minutes down a meme hole. Like, that won't happen. Just put the buffer into it, and then if it does happen, at least you've still got time to do the thing you need to do.
Yeah, especially for those larger projects too. We talked about if you're doing like that home renovation project and you are working with other contractors and things like that, if you have a good idea on when you would expect, say the kitchen cabinets to be delivered, before you have the person come in with the countertops, giving yourself that extra week or so buffer. If you're the impatient type, you're just like, I don't want to wait for that. Like, I want my kitchen put back together as quick as possible. But the last thing you want, like we talked about before, is your kitchen countertops coming before your cabinets are in, right? Like, that's just one of those things where giving yourself a little bit of space is important. Also, in that way, like you said, if things get done sooner, that's even better. There's nothing better than delivering something or getting something done ahead of time. But working up to that last minute, while I am the type of person that is like, someone gives me a deadline, this often happens when I do go on those side quests, Jess, where suddenly my boss or a coworker will be like, hey, remember that thing I asked you for? And I was like, God, I could have just done that so weeks ago. And they're like, hey, it'd be really great. You're ready to go for an hour. I can get so much done in an hour. It's because I've already been thinking about it. It's been up here in the subconscious, honestly. At least I know like I've thought about it, like literally thought about doing it, not necessarily like, oh, that thing. And I can get a lot of stuff done in a short amount of time. I do my best work that way, but it is hella stressful though. I don't love that feeling. I'm like sweating, quickly putting stuff together. And so I've been trying to kind of train myself out of that often, where I was like, okay, Mark, you said you were going to do that. Let's get that done now, right? Let's just outline a structure, kind of what we talked about before this brainstorm, so that if I do have to pull something together quickly, I can, because I've already kind of plopped all that information down somewhere. There's nothing worse than being asked for something, in a short amount of time where you're like, that was 3 months ago when we talked about that.
And I know that we, started this process by doing that brain dump, getting thoughts onto paper or whatever kind of system is going to be best for storing that information, at least initially. But making sure that all of this stuff is not just kind of like, written on paper and then forgotten, or like, jotted down into a notes app and then just left there to fester. For us to actually get the project work done, it needs somewhere to live that is going to be referenced more regularly. And of course, like, depending on what kind of project you're doing, different spaces are going to make more sense. For instance, for me, in terms of wedding planning, I found that the place that that's living right now is mainly in a spreadsheet, which feels a little bit strange for a project plan because I haven't really done a project plan in like a regular kind of Excel-esque spreadsheet. Is on Google Drive. But the main reason for that is it was shared to me by my wedding planner. So it's like, well, she has access, I have access, and because we both need access to it, it makes sense to have it in that digital space. I did end up writing it out in a separate wedding journal type thing, but because I need to update it for her on the digital copy, that's mainly where the updates are happening. Plus, it also means that because it's digital, I can link in things like email attachments and Pinterest board links and all of this other kind of stuff that's going to be helpful for the people that I'm working with. Having all that information in one spot means that it's kind of like the one-stop shop type thing. You go there for all of your wedding planning needs. But of course, like, depending on what project you're working on, other spaces might work better. Where do you typically like to store your project plan type things?
So I'm the same way. Once I get everything written out, it's on paper. I'll usually do my first timeline or like a Gantt chart or something on paper for myself because I want to make sure it works before I start sharing it broadly. A lot of the times for my team, we're using Airtable. That's where all of our projects and our tasks and our timelines are already going into. I like it because you can have that data view, which is like essentially like an Excel spreadsheet, so to say, but you can literally click a button and turn that into a timeline. It's one of my favorite things about Airtable is like how easy you can take one group of information and then kind of like blow it out to these different views and different forms. So a lot of times we'll do that. There are times we have some of our program managers that like to do things in PowerPoint. I don't love that, but it's okay. I can make it work. I can still do a timeline or a Gantt chart in there. The problem I have with a lot of that, a lot of the time, is that it's not always shared. We'll have some people who will email those pieces, and then suddenly you have multiple versions, and you have people's like, final Mark Figurito at the end, And I was like, I can't do this. I think no matter what you're doing, if you're taking it digital, just make sure it's a shared space. Whether certain people only have view access, right? You want to be the only one that updates it, but other people need to see it. You can set up those terms yourself. I think it's really important. So that's usually what I'll tell them to do. Like if they're like, put it in PowerPoint. Like, I don't want to do it, but okay.
I have to tell you this awful thing, which is just like your story just reminded me, but like I was talking to a party who will not be named, and they were telling me about their work managers and where they store their meeting minutes, and they take their meeting minutes in Excel. I'm like, why? Why would you use a spreadsheet that's made for like, crunching numbers and making graphs and all of that to take down like long written bulleted notes? It makes no sense. I was like, do they need like a refresher in like Microsoft Office and how it works?
I mean, if that's the only tool you have, work with what you got. But it's a good point to say, like, use the right tool for what you're trying to do. If it's like, don't try to make something work in a program that's not made to do that. Like when people do like project planning or tasking or things in PowerPoint, I'm in a corporate space. It's just a go-to thing. I'm like, this doesn't make sense for anybody. PowerPoint is for presentations. It is not for note-taking. It is not for like a Kanban board. Like it's not for those things. Like find the right tool for that. I think it's really important. But again, put it in a space that's shared also, so that way when one person updates it, it updates it for everyone. There's nothing worse than having 3 versions of a schedule. It's like, well, you have one version of it, I have a different one, I'm in an update. Didn't I communicate that to you? No, you didn't. I didn't write that down. It gets to be a lot. For myself, I do like to still keep a timeline in an analog spot, but that is for me. And I have to be the one that has to deal with if things move and all of that. That's why anytime I do any type of project planning in a notebook, I use a pencil.
No, that's very, very fair.
easily be erased. Anytime I do it, I have to remind myself, like, Mark, use a pencil because none of these dates will stay where they are. It never has ever happened in my entire life where a date that we stuck to has stayed there. Things always move. So I'm able to do that. Like, I have a calendar in the front of my bullet journal. I think I've talked about this in my plan with me's and like my bullet journal setups. I really love a calendar planner view, but the reality is that those dates move. So I often am like, okay, I have to go into the office on this day, and then something will come up and we have to move it. Instead of like whiting it out or putting a sticker over top of it or doing whatever, it's like, erase it, put it over here. It makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, I find that like working for myself by myself, a lot of my projects don't require other people. And also, a lot of my projects aren't necessarily like work based, or at least the ones that I feel the need to plan out aren't work based projects. Because you can think about like, making a video a project, it has multiple steps. So it's like, plan the topic, the packaging, like, thumbnail and title and such, film, edit, re edit, B roll, upload, whatever, all of those kind of things. But because that is a process that I do so often, I don't typically feel the need to like plan it out. I just write those tasks down in my journal and then get them done. But if we think about like projects that I feel do need planning, these are the ones that are usually a little bit big ticket in work. If we're thinking about like, like a product or something like that, or they're going to be something that's more like a personal project. And oftentimes I will plan those on paper just because I like the tactile feel of it. I like your point about using a pencil because probably should be doing that, but I'm not. I just got little migrated arrows all up over the show, and it's fine. Most of the time when I plan those out, I like to plan them out by week rather than by day, because any of the projects that I usually am writing down, it's typically got a timeline that's at least 3 or 4 weeks. So it's like, okay, well, in week 1, we'll do these things. In week 2, we'll do these things. I haven't had a project recently that's been such a short one that I felt it was big enough to bother planning out. And then I needed to go and scaffold it in terms of like what day certain things were being done on. Most of those I actually just kind of like, I'd say I plan them in my head. Are they planned? I don't know, but they're certainly executed. They're just not necessarily written down in like a formal plan.
No, I'm the same way. I've been using those analog cards from Augmonk, and I do the same exact thing. Like, I'll be like, review the Planner Pod episode. Like, there's multiple things that will go into like reviewing or editing or doing a voiceover or whatever. You make a great point. It's like you've done it so many times that you don't have to create that phase card. But like when I started making videos, recording things, doing all of that, I actually had cards like this, very similar. And I've also used sticky notes too for this too on each of those phases to remind myself. So I had something to check off to get through with it. Like I would always do like an export check. Make sure the audio was good, make sure the video was good, all of the different things you have to do. Eventually it just becomes normal. You don't have to document it. But up front though, I think it is really important so you don't miss a step. I think a really great one for me was like hit record before doing a plan with me and recording a video. Like things like that you're like, well, of course you would do that. How many times have I done a plan with me where I thought I had hit record and never did? And then you get to the end of it, or turn your mic on so that you can do audio. That's happened more times than I'd like to, where I'm like, I said everything I needed to say, but it did not capture any of it because I didn't switch my mic on. Like things like that you're just like, okay, I know that now. I mean, a bad thing sometimes needs to happen to you for you to remember to do it next time. But eventually you'll get to a point where maybe you don't need to. But I think no matter what, though, still like a timeline, a visual, something like that is super helpful just to be able to do that. I don't know. I'm a visual learner. So I think for me, that's why it's always really important. If someone's like, oh, that's next Thursday, I'm like, I don't even know what today is. I'm like, let me look at a calendar. Okay, today is Tuesday. Next Thursday is visually right there. Now I know what we're doing.
Yeah, and I think that if you have any kind of project in your life that is the kind of thing that is going to happen again, taking the time to set up a template can be so helpful because it means that you don't have to do all of that work up front again. So if we're thinking about it in terms of like video creation, you just write yourself a checklist, right? And that means that every time you're going to make a video, you go through the checklist. If you're thinking about it in terms of like, I don't know, report writing or whatever, it's like, okay, this is our formatting for titles. Have I checked that that's the right thing? This is the way that they like to structure XYZ. This is, the font requirement, or like anything that you need to check to make sure that you're putting out the piece of work that is actually going to be accepted as like, usable or whatever. It's like, if you have your checklist of steps to make sure that like everything's done the way it should, quote, quote, be done, then it means you save yourself the hassle and heartache of having things sent back to you and say, sorry, that's not actually what we want, or sorry, that's not good enough. Yeah. We don't want that. If we think about it in terms of like a home project or whatnot, most home projects we don't do twice unless somebody really colossally cocked it up the first time. That's more so thinking about like, big ticket projects. But something like making your meal plan for the week is technically a project, right? It's like, look in the fridge to see what things we actually have and stuff that we need to use. Figure out what people are doing in the week. So, who's actually going to be there for each of the meals? Figure out meals that people will actually eat. No, sorry, this kid doesn't like lentils anymore, like whatever, right? So if you have your kind of like formalized process to follow for those types of projects, those things that have multiple steps, but you do them often, then it just means that you streamline that process for yourself, and it can it just saves so much time. Saves so much time.
I mean, even breaking down this episode, it was like, well, do I need to write that down? Because I just do that automatically now. But for those of you who are not project planning or don't do it often, or maybe have something coming up, it is an important thing to be able to break something down into digestible pieces, especially if think about like giving directions, right? It's like, turn a left here and turn right there. You're like, well, wait, I've never driven that road before. You're like, oh, let me give you a little bit more extra detail there to be extra helpful with it. I think it's the same thing with those project plans, like whatever you need to figure out for yourself, write down, visualize, kind of however that looks like up front. Once you do that a few times, like I said, you have a template, or whether it's even a mental template, right, of going through with it, it makes things so much easier.
It's kind of like giving yourself like SOPs, standard operating procedures or whatever for your life. Which can feel very kind of like clinical or corporate or whatnot, but there's a reason they do it, all right? Like if you think about big business, or whatnot, they need to save time where they can. Time is money, all of that kind of thing. So it's like if you are the kind of person who thinks you don't have enough time in your life, quote, 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 make quotation marks over that. But if you are that way inclined, then having these standard operating procedures or these kind of like templates and flowcharts and regular practices that you do can just help save you brain space and time and energy and all the things.
And in some cases, when things come at you and you're not really quite prepared, sometimes it is really nice to have some methods or kind of pre-done templates out there if you're not ready to create your own. And that's one of the things that Jess and I will actually be talking about at Go Wild as our productivity planning talk is going to go about. Jess, I'm just like excited for that because it's like some of my favorite ways to break down work, and like we get to share with a whole group of people.
I know, I'm really, really excited for it. I mean, like, I'm excited, but I'm also nervous because speaking on the main stage, like, okay, last year I had to introduce Bonnie from Archer and Olive. I say had to, like it was some giant trauma thing for me. It was not that bad. I just don't speak in front of an audience. So I'm very excited, but also very, very nervous. And I'm so glad that you're going to be there with me because otherwise I'd just be like full on freak out. But like the planning process for that is it's going to be a project. It has multiple steps. So it's been quite interesting, like, applying some of the things we just talked about to that very daunting, very closely near project that is like, it's literally in a week. It's in a week, maybe a week and a couple days. We are going to be on the main stage at Go Wild. I'm so excited.
It's going to be such a good time. So hopefully you'll be able to join us. We'll definitely talk more about it post Go Wild, just like we did last year, just kind of like what was it like if you're not able to attend, what was our experience this year, which I think will be different from last year. I feel like a vet now. I've been in a full one. Last year I did the crop and I did speak in front of a bunch of people. I'm just used to it anyway. It doesn't bother me, but just to be able to do that, collaborate and share that and really kind of be there as like the Planner Pals podcast. Like we're representing this year as something that like we've had going on for this past year, almost year and a half at this point now. Like it's pretty incredible.
Yeah, I think the Planner Pals podcast is out of its infancy. Like it's officially 1.5 or whatever. I noticed somewhere someone said like, "Oh, did you guys celebrate your 1 year anniversary and whatnot?" I'm like, we actually didn't. We kind of just let it slip by because isn't the 1 year anniversary is like Valentine's Day or something?
I don't know. I thought it was like January-ish or February-ish or so.
January is like when you floated the idea, but I think like the first episode either came out on the 15th or the 14th of Feb.
We have like an offset celebration. We celebrate like end of year. Like we definitely run this podcast like we run our bullet journals and planners. I feel like on like a yearly basis, even though like when we started wasn't exactly the beginning of the year. That's how I think about it anyway. It's just like it caps off at the end of our year. We start fresh in the new one. So an anniversary doesn't really exist necessarily. We work in months and years at this point.
I mean, yeah, very much that. I'm thinking back to like my first bullet journal where I like stretched it out so I could get to like the half year mark and then stretched it out again so that I could get to the end of year mark just so that I could start fresh on like January 1st.
We've all been there. We're Planner Pals. We'd love to hear from you what kind of projects you're planning. And if you have any methods, methodologies, or ways that you like to go about planning, definitely drop a comment whether you're watching this on YouTube. Of course, if you'd like to drop a comment over on Instagram and let us know as well, feel free. And also, you can always feel free to email us too, plannerpalspodcast@gmail.com. Let us know. We love to hear from this community on what's going on and definitely sharing more information, more new things. Like there's just so many ways of doing work out there that we don't know about. This community, we've got each other's back for sure.
Exactly. And as I mentioned at the start, like planning projects is like the bread and butter. So any and all tips that I can get about this, I want to bring it into my system. And I know you have great ideas. Very much looking forward to reading your comments. And as always, thanks for watching.